All right, we're gonna
them.
call the executive committee meeting on. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
I see one change we should have.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
We can get a second first.
I'll second it then.
All right,
With the
discussion.
change that it says following the closed session, the county board will reconvene. It'll be the executive committee. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that was my Scrivener's error.
Just a typo, just so that we know it's the executive, that the whole board is. All right.
Okay. Anything else on the agenda? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried. What are minutes from our June 9th meeting?
I'll motion to approve.
I'll second that also.
Any discussion on the minutes? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries. Are there any public comments?
Yes, I would like to make a public comment. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nancy Beck. I live at 1797 State Road 87 in St. Croix Falls. I'm in the township of St. Croix Falls, and I am in District 8 for Polk County. And I am filing, I left copies with the clerk. I do want to file a complaint this morning. Running for public office is one of the most important ways citizens can serve our communities. And that is what motivated us when we stepped up to run in the April nonpartisan Polk County Supervisor election. Instead, this act of community service made us targets of well-funded and vicious partisan attacks. I am filing this claim to have the county investigate these unethical and illegal campaign activities. Several of us had come by in July. We were going to talk to you then, and there was miscommunication where we should be, and so you gave us the opportunity to come back. And then, since then, we have found out a few more items that we wanted to bring to the county's attention. I do want to speak a little bit, very personally about the letter. I was one of those that was targeted with this very hateful letter. There are so many things wrong with this. This is not me. Nobody has contacted me to ask my opinions on this. There are many lies and vicious statements in there about me personally. A couple that I took to point, especially for me, anybody knows me, Tim has known me for a long time, and my family. I have always supported or been involved in small businesses around Osceola. They say I'm going to cut all of that. My husband was a Navy veteran of 32 years. That is closely related to military. I highly respect the military and what they're doing. There are many things with each of us that they said very wrong in there. And we don't know how all of this comes together either with all these pieces of this puzzle. This is my first time running for a public office like this. And I thank everybody who is doing that, because we all know it's difficult to get people to want to run for office right now. And then when we are attacked like this in a nonpartisan race, this is one of the reasons why people don't want to run. So I encourage all of us to look into this, and so that we can make it a better opportunity for people who want to do this sort of public service. You all took an oath to uphold the truth. Chris Nelson did that too. And just because he's out of office now does not mean that he should not be held accountable for things that were done then. So I really encourage you to look at my complaint and look into it further. We don't have all the answers. We don't pretend to know that. We just see that there have been several violations. So let's make sure that future voters and candidates do not have to put up with this sort of illegal and unethical activity. I believe that Polk County is better than this. We are better than that. So let's stand up for our elections. Thank you for your time.
Any other public comments?
Yes. Sharon, I apologize. I know we said the 3 minutes per person, but I forgot the timer. Do you want
That's
me?
fine.
Okay, all right.
Well,
Sorry. Okay, all right.
My name is Dawn Martinson. I live at 1642 87th Avenue, which is a post office addresser. That's Garfield Township. Bought land here in 2018. I'm here just to speak with on behalf of Nancy and Lisa and John and the others. What we're really seeking is not controversy or upset of any kind. What we want to uphold is the importance of good governance, encouraging democratic participation, transparency, high standards, respectful public debate, and communication around all the processes of our county government. One of the things in the letter that went out speaking about 7 of the county board candidates says they want to turn Polk County into Minneapolis. There were a couple of references to that. And I wonder, what they mean. I'm actually born and raised in suburban Minneapolis. And then I lived in St. Paul for 13 years from 2002 to 2015. Are they talking about having Fortune 500 companies? Are they talking about a large respected research university and other colleges, museums, music venues, nationally recognized theaters, parks and trails accessible to wheelchairs, pedestrians, and bicycles? Are they talking about recognized newspapers, publishing, all kinds of things? I don't think so. I don't think that's what they meant. And because later in the letter it talks about a radical agenda that unleashed rioting and dangerous defund the police rhetoric, I think what we're talking about are racial dog whistles. And that goes long history in our politics in the country. And I was able to find an article, an essay that referenced what those are. And they are often, this is a quote from Jennifer Lubriel on everydayfeminism.com from May 23rd, 2017. Racial dog whistles are often sneakily used when politicians want to speak about race, specifically to their target audience. The coded messages, and that's key, are used to reinforce racist ideas that the country's societal and economic problems are because of people of color. There are 3 aspects involved when politicians use racial dog whistles. First, politicians force race into the conversation through thinly veiled racist remarks against people of color. Second, they make sure to not directly reference any one racial or ethnic group so they can't be accused of direct racism. And third, they shame any critics who try to call them out on the racist comments. And one example that was not used in this letter, but is kind of inferred, law and order. This had its origins particularly in the Southern strategy of the Republican Party with Nixon. On the surface, that phrase seems pretty non-threatening. Politicians who use it seem to be saying their policies will focus on making sure the law will be upheld and that any lawbreakers will be held accountable. What could be so bad about that? The dog whistle is that it's often used to police low-income communities, particularly Black, Hispanic, and other people of color. They use the phrase to signal that people of color are inherently criminal. Now, I'm not making this up. Another way to think about that is to talk about we have a safe neighborhood. We want to have a safe place to live. And that's a coded language, again, for keeping out crime, and crime often is associated with people of color. Looters and rioters. And in reference to what happened in the Twin Cities, many of the people that incited the worst of it were outside agitators who were in fact white people, and that did not get a lot of coverage. So I think that's a part of what we're hoping for in terms of good governance, and to learn from our history and to recognize that in Wisconsin, we had sundown towns. We still have issues around race and access to education, home ownership, accumulation of wealth, education, all of those things. And we don't want to encourage or accept these kind of dog whistles. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Yep, I would like to speak. My name is John Brack. I live at 1131 55th Avenue, just outside of Amory in District 14. Lion C.J. Simone was my opponent. I ran for District 14. I got some advice from people about how to run for office here in Polk County. And that advice was to never say anything negative about your opponent. Well, Lion CJ and his wife, who's the treasurer of the Republican Party, put out a letter that I'm sure you've all had a chance to read. Everything he said about me in that letter was a lie. I am a bus driver for Amory, and so I see the county roads and use the county roads and the township roads. And I submit to you that I spend more time on Polk County trails than anybody in this county. I feel like I would have been an asset to the county board of supervisors. So I ran a clean campaign, don't say anything negative about my opponent. Well, now you guys have the chance to see if you have the intestinal fortitude to stop us going down this road of Polk County elections devolving into the mud. I'm taking one step and saying that CJ Simone is a lion, SOB, and I hate him for it. Everything in that letter was just an outright lie. Where are we going to go from here? It's up to you guys. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Hi, good morning. My name is Lisa Dorr, and I have my pink shirt on today too. I live in the town of Lake Town, and I wanted to thank you guys for taking our comments this morning, especially early in the morning, because I got to get back and rake my hay because it's going to rain tomorrow. I hope we may be blessed with that. I'm here to reiterate our call here that you guys investigate the illegal and unethical practices that were part of our election this year. And, you know, obviously I ran in April and I wanted to serve my community. I didn't win. And I'm not here because I didn't win. I'm not here because of sour grapes. I mean, I could be at home right now, you know, raking my hay, but you guys have to be here. So I'm not here because of sour grapes. I'm here because it was really hard on me and the other people who ran personally to have this stuff said about us. And I'm asking your support to look into it because we have reviewed the financial reports that we got from the clerk, and no one is reporting who paid for the letter that cost thousands of dollars. The Republican Party sent that letter out to 7 districts. And I mean, I got 2 copies of it. So it went to a lot of homes. We're estimating that it cost at least $7,000 or $8,000. No one is reporting that. So we don't know who did it. We don't know who paid for it. Nancy has filed her complaint and documents several of the state laws that were broken. When you took your oath, you made an oath not to break state laws, but Mr. Nelson did break state laws when he took out that ad in the newspaper and claimed that as chairman of the board, he had a responsibility to tell people that I was a radical activist living amongst you. That was illegal. He went beyond his assigned duties. Your code of ethics is very clear that no supervisor has an authority to try to control the political activity of other people. And your rules of order very precisely define what the chair's duties are. And the chair has no duty to inform the public that there are radical activists in your midst. And I also wanted to mention that the ridiculous claim that the Republican letter made that we had pictures of a ham driving a police car, and that we hate law enforcement. I mean, my husband was in law enforcement for a decade. And I had people call me up, my neighbors, and ask me, why do you hate the cops? You know, and that was really hard on us. So why am I asking you to investigate Chris Nelson? You know, he's a loser. He lost. Why would we spend our time investigating him? Well, because it's simple. If we don't hold people accountable, then next time it might be you. I mean, honestly, they attacked 7 of us. Who knows what it'll be next time if in Polk County you can go ahead and do this and no one takes any action. Particularly, the complaint lays out several questions we'd like to have. Who planned this? It was a very carefully planned campaign rolled out with the ads and the letter. the timing was obviously strategically put together. And who paid and designed all this material? And then how is it possible that the treasurer of the Republican Party could write the checks for it and pay for all this stuff? And then there's no reporting done at all on it. So we'd really like to see some of those questions answered. Let's make sure that future voters and people who run like me and you guys don't have to put up with it. Thanks so much.
Any other public comments? All right, are there any supervisors not seated as committee members here today that have any information? If not, that would lead us to a discussion regarding citizens ethics complaint.
So I reviewed the complaint. And we can start first, let's just go from the top to the bottom. I presume there wasn't anything new added to the complaint today, or was there anything in addition to what was provided before?
There may have, actually, yes, there have been some things added since I left
There's
since I left, yes, I brought new copies of the complaint. The official complaint. So there are a few things added. Yeah, the oath and bonds is one of the statutes. It was not in the other information we left last month.
So I've only reviewed the original complaint. So let's start with the easiest one. The Republican Party for Polk County did report to the Ethics Commission the cost of the postage and the printing of the letter that was sent. So it was reported. It was not a candidate, it was the political party, and statutorily they reported it correctly. So I was able to produce that, and I did share that with the county administrator once we saw that. So that one is a non-starter. The other issue as it relates to the Polk County Ethics Code, if we were to interpret the letter that Chris Nelson sponsored in the newspapers as violating the portion of the ethics code as he's trying to use his position to influence the political activity of others, then any political ad, any lobbying, any canvassing, any door-to-door would be trying to influence the political activity of another person. Whether it was in poor taste is a different question, but it does not violate the county ethics code. If you look at chapter 19.59, the Code of Ethics for Local Government Officials, and our ethics code that is derived in large part from that code, we're talking about financial issues. And again, if the Republican Party had not provided the expenditure to the Ethics Commission, then perhaps the Republican Party would have been in violation. But I don't believe that former Chairman Nelson violated Wisconsin statute 19.59. Even if there is an allegation, and again, I haven't reviewed the new information, and I will do that. This committee can investigate ethics complaints as it relates to our ethics code. If you don't agree with my opinion as far as whether or not the advertised notice to the public that former Chairman Nelson sponsored in local papers, if you believe it does violate the ethics code, this committee could do an investigation and create some findings. The other argument, however, would be that our ethics code applies to supervisors. He is no longer a supervisor, he is a former supervisor. So there would be an argument that this committee has no jurisdiction to look into an ethics complaint on a former supervisor. I'm not saying that that argument would win the day. I'm just saying that there would be that argument. If you look at the provisions of enforcement, again, it would only be to a sitting supervisor that this committee could have that enforcement mechanism. At this point, the complaint under 19.59 would need to be investigated by the district attorney's office, not the county board, not this committee. The district attorney has some obligations to look into a verified complaint. And if the district attorney declines to prosecute, then the complainant needs to go to the Attorney General's office to determine whether or not the Attorney General wants to look into that complaint as far as 19.59. So I will have to look through and see what else was added, but I'm not going to try to do that while we all sit here and wait. So if I find that there's anything outside of what I've already provided to you, we'll put it on a future agenda.
All right, anyone have any questions?
I do, because
Hold
we
on,
know.
hold on,
I'm
hold
so-
on.
I'm sorry.
We're in a meeting.
Okay.
You'll just keep us apprised of your
Yeah.
findings and,
I will look through the amended complaint and see if there's anything added. It looks like the oaths and bonds, I have not reviewed that, so I will go ahead and look at that, and if there's anything, I'll put it on a future agenda.
so at this time, the committee is finished with it, so we hear back from you.
That's up to you, but that would be my recommendation.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? Could we just keep this on? I haven't seen that hard copy and I would like if we could just have it on next month's agenda item so I can catch up and we can talk about this again in detail with the new one.
We'll have it on the agenda, and if Leah finds anything that this committee needs to take action on, we'll move on it.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Oh, I got one question. Now with that, now that we're gonna update some of our ethics codes anyway, we're in the process of doing that. Does any of this could tie in? We really don't have control over what a newspaper puts in. I don't, is what I'm saying. But
This is the hard part about the word ethics, right?
yeah,
Because again, whether something is in poor taste is different than whether it violates ethics. When I was in law school, we took a class called Professional Responsibility. It was the ethics class for lawyers to be. And I remember talking with colleagues and saying, I think they just taught us how to walk the line, right? How to stay within the bounds of what you're allowed to do, but to get as close to it as you can. And so, again, if what an ethics code cannot do for people who are running for office is impinge upon the First Amendment. So you couldn't have an ethics code that says, don't say mean things about your opponent. That, again, would impinge upon campaigning. Now, whether calling someone an activist, some people might wear that as a badge of honor and think it's a positive thing. Other people might find it offensive. But it certainly is an opinion of one person about somebody else. And so it wouldn't violate some type of defamation. It wouldn't rise to the level of slander when you have an opinion about somebody else. Having said that, once you decide to run for office, your protections against slander and defamation are lowered. And so you are putting yourself into a realm where people are going to attack. And that is unfortunate. So I don't know how you can incorporate something into our ethics code to address this type of behavior without impinging upon, what we're allowed to do as citizens when we have an opinion, whether it's the wrong opinion or not. I don't know how you would try to regulate that type of speech and conduct without hitting up against the First Amendment.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair? Leah, could we do in our ethics redrafting add, and I'm not sure where this, what is specific, but could we add some election law citations around which future candidates within, I guess they'd already be elected, so that wouldn't be candidates. So add some of the election laws into our into our, what do we call it, ethics code. So that'd be something, we don't have to figure that out right now, but I guess I'm gonna maybe talk to you on the side, figure that out on the side a little bit, and maybe we can bring it back to the committee.
Sure. So in 1959, it does address candidates for elective office and taking money in exchange for a promise to vote. Those kinds of things are in both our code and 1959. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm not sure exactly what, no, I don't know exactly what I'm talking about. I just felt like there might be something within Wisconsin election law that we could harvest and put in our ethics to get at some of these issues that have been brought up.
So we can talk about that. One of the things in 19.59, it requires the ethics code at the county level to be an ordinance. And I don't believe our ethics code, when it was passed many years ago, was ever ordained, and it's not in our code of ordinances. So if we're looking at codifying it into our actual municipal code, which I think we should do because that is what the statute requires, we can incorporate state law, certainly.
Okay, yeah, let's look at that. Thank you.
Sorry, Amy, but that's like the other laws too, that we do it by definition. Put it in there because then if the state changes it, we don't have to change our whole.
Right, incorporate by reference.
Yeah, we incorporate by reference. So I mean, it's probably already in there, but we don't want to rewrite something and then if the state changes it, we have to change ours every time. So that's kind of how some of them codes are.
All right, well, I think we've slipped out of our discussion regarding the citizens' complaint and brought ourselves right into recommendations for updates to the current ethics policy. So that's what we'll be on now.
On that. Basically what we were just saying, yeah.
Recommendations for updates to the current ethics policy.
So clearly we want to, once we update it, make it an ordinance so that we can incorporate it into the code.
I was just at a seminar for ethics was one of the issues from the Wisconsin Counties Association, their legal department. They were all there. And we spent half of the seminar for 2 days. One of them, half of that was on ethics. There were 50 chairmen of county boards from the state of Wisconsin there. And there were 50 different opinions as to what ethics is. And if we try to define it to fit any one of our incidences or problems that we're experiencing at this time, I don't want to be around when we try to enforce those in the future because they'll never fit another problem compared to the ones that we're experiencing at the time. Ethics is one of the worst things to determine. It's simple enough, and that's the way to keep it, because everybody has their own opinion of ethics, and everybody, believe me, has their own ethics. So it's a poor word to try to determine what in the world it means.
I do think the majority of the ethics code, both statute and our code, really is geared towards financial impropriety as it relates to your position. And that's kind of black and white.
That's easy to define, very easy, that part.
Right.
But boy, you get into some of the other things, and it's a problem. So we got to be real careful about that. And you did a good job of explaining what the problems are. And you can only, in your mind, you can only expand upon what your determination was to confuse it a little further. You did a nice job of confusing. Because that's what it deserves to be confusing.
It is one of those, again, ethics is it's a difficult topic.
So, well, Will be bringing us something back that we need to put into an ordinance?
We can, I think what I'll do, since Supervisor Middleton wants to talk about, what options, I might just have a meeting with her to see what her ideas are. And then we should just keep this as a topic on this committee. And we can bring it back and we'll need to create an ordinance anyway. So one way or the other, whether it's just making some minor modifications. And incorporating other things. So I think that's what I'll do. That work?
And anyone else who has recommendations, it's really an opportunity for supervisors to say, here are some changes we think are needed, and we can do the same thing.
There, the censure option, if somebody did, let's say Supervisor O'Connell decided to use his position to negotiate and, get money from the county to do contract work. I don't know. And so that would be a verified complaint. And, we would bring it before this committee, and there are things within this code that would allow the committee to take some action. So that might be something we want to look at, is the action that you are giving yourselves the authority to do within this code. Is that satisfactory? Is that sufficient? Do you want it stronger?
So my other question here is that, would you put it in codified form?
We would look,
Yeah, we would start doing that right away.
Yeah,
and
we would
then
look
see what we
at-
add to it, so it's not like this and then a restart.
yeah, we would do Muni code the way we did our
Yep.
county board rules of order, and then looked at it if it's right within the code, so we know exactly what it would look like.
In the right order or whatever. If there's, I think that would help us too, to have it in that order, so we know.
All right, anything else? If not, we're gonna have a discussion of the draft MOU revision provided by the Polk County Fair Society.
So each of the three of you has a copy of the proposed MOU from the Fair Society in front of you. I'm gonna hand one to
Did
Mo
Amy
as
get
well.
one by email?
I emailed a copy to Amy. Did you get that?
Thumbs up.
Okay, great. What I will say is that their proposed MOU is very similar to the MOU that we currently have in place. A lot of the language is very similar. I would say likely the biggest change is, if you look at remedies on the last page, their remedy for any breach of the agreement is that if they substantially breach the agreement, they then get to buy the county land from us for $1, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if they're the ones in breach, they would then be gaining the benefit of acquiring all of the land and the property for $1. Basically, as a way for them to purposefully breach and get what they have said is what they ultimately want, which is to have the land themselves. That's something that likely we're going to want to negotiate out. But
Who would determine it substantially?
so
Who makes the determination?
ultimately, it would be us saying, hey, you breached the contract, is really what it comes down to. Whether it's a substantial breach comes down to whether they breached, we told them they breached, and then they didn't remedy, because they have an opportunity to correct anything that we tell them they did wrong. But if they just wanted the property, they could just not do something and then say, oh, well, I guess we have to buy it from you. Right? So that's one of the biggest issues that I see with the MOU that they proposed. Again, the plan here is that ultimately, after we talk today about the document a little bit more, at the next meeting between the executive committee and the Fair Society, that we will more or less go through anything in their proposed document and go through our proposed document line by line, say this is what we agree on, this is what we don't agree on. Are there any big things that are issues here, have the two parties potentially agree one way or the other on those things. And then what I would probably recommend is that you allow the attorneys to kind of hammer out any more specific things when the more general concepts are agreed to between the two parties, if that makes sense. So for now, I just want to highlight a couple of things that are of concern so that as you're looking at it, before you go into that meeting, you have an idea of what the potential problems are. I didn't give you a copy of the proposed MOU that we had drafted back in 2020. I think it was, Malia. Is that 2020 that we sent it out?
Would have been that or late 19 or 2019.
Because we had originally drafted a proposed MOU, which kind of kicked off everything, right? We had drafted a new document saying, hey, can you look at this? Maybe we'll negotiate something. And so I didn't bring a copy of that, but I'll send that to you as well in your email. Or if you want a paper copy, you can come by our office and pick it up. But then you can look at each of them, compare, and then each of you will have the opportunity to add things, remove things, and then we can talk about them again at that ultimate meeting. But so, again, the document that you have in front of you, if you look at under management and use of fairgrounds under number 5, it talks about the Fair Society being able to make ordinary and routine modifications or repairs to fairground facilities. Mo, I think, has a concern about that particular provision, specifically related to some incidents with the fair facilities recently. More or less, he would just ask that any contractor that they would use would be a licensed contractor. One, they're on county property. They should be using licensed contractors to begin with. But that would then get spelled out in the contract. So that's something that we likely would want to negotiate and get added in there. Again, I don't want to be too specific about exactly what we want to do because this isn't a closed session. I don't want to get into what potentially our negotiations are going to be. Again, I just want to present to you some things that I see as issues here. More or less, again, the document reflects a lot of what is in the original MOU. Under number 8, they are to provide a capital improvement plan as soon as practicable. Again, I would recommend that we stick to a specific time or date for them to adhere to. As soon as practical gives a little bit too much leeway and does not potentially comply with what we need to complete our budget appropriately.
So some of that we should have that it would go along with us, like capital improvement plan should be out 5 years. And that's something like we do at the county level so that they don't just change it every week.
Right, and so in
So,
there,
and then by August it used to be too. So I mean, there used to be for the budget season, they can't come in January 1st and say we want $1 million again. I know for something. So I mean, it'd be like every other department. It's almost like a department. We should treat it. If that seems more fair to you guys, so you know when the stuff is coming out.
Right, because we plug things in for 5 years
Yeah,
for the fairgrounds.
but then they have to. But then they should come up with the date, that August date in October, for their budget, so that the county's budget would fit in, and it's not an emergency. If that makes sense, that it fits our budgeting season.
right, and so having those hard lines, those aren't things that they included in their MOU. There are no hard dates for when things need to be done. Those are all things that I think need to be added. And I think they are included in the MOU that we presented, which again, I'll send over.
The old one had a lot of that. They didn't like dates. They didn't like that.
And Mo had some recommended requirements for the MOU regarding, when somebody is doing work on one of the county buildings on the fair property, that they're licensed contractors, that they're not some unlicensed handy person who is going to make the bathroom walls sweat.
Or have insurance. We have that too. It's in our policies. So
Right.
they should have to follow our policy.
Right, and
Should be
having,
fit in here a little better.
work approved by Public Works Division Director prior to starting major work. And so I think we'll take those recommendations and incorporate those into our recommended negotiation for the next.
So take major work is what, 5,000 and up, 10,000 and up? I mean, we should put a number on that too, so that it's defined.
Well, any,
I'd rather not have a number totally on it, as
Okay.
I'd rather have a commercial electrician doing a light socket in our building
Yeah.
over there versus a homeowner volunteering to put in a light socket.
Sure. Okay. But now anything major like our policies, when do they have to do the RFPs and stuff? I mean, they should have, that should be in here so they know that.
so you're saying basically incorporate by reference our finance and expenditure purchasing policy
I would
into the MOU?
think
That's
so.
a really good idea.
I think so.
That's number two.
So it was Mo's idea. That's why it's such a good idea.
Following the county's purchasing
Yes.
policy.
But I mean, I think
for
that's,
the amounts.
yeah, but I think that's what we should do with amounts and all that, that are, treat them just like a department too, so that they do our budget season, everything right with the county to stay in line, I think, with everybody. If it makes sense, I think.
That they have to
Kim, I-
discuss their finances, including grants and where they're spending their money and how they're
Right.
using the, yeah, absolutely.
One thought, excuse me, one thought I had on that. I like that idea, Kim, that it's folded into our timeline. The only thing I'm thinking about is they will have just come off the fair schedule. So to make an August, we should ask them about how they could make that August deadline, but they will have just been coming off of, intense period in getting the fair off the ground.
But I
Just
think,
think about
but planning for the prior years and the prior next 5 years, it's easily done in June, looking at future projects. As we try
Yeah,
to
okay.
completed by July for the fair of the.
Okay.
In September, they could do their financials, that would come, still have time for the budget.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, they have plenty of time. I mean, once the fairs, they almost shut down, so they got plenty of.
Hey, Joe, can I ask you a question just quick on that back to the topic of breach of contract and they taking over the fair for $1. Have you talked to their lawyer about that at all? Or was that ever a discussion of trying to noodle through any of that at all before it comes to the full group?
Because our office does not have the authority to
Oh.
go in and do the negotiation ourselves with the other attorney, I don't have the authority, more or less, to go in and kind of even make tentative proposals to them for what I'm going to be recommending to the group on what we do.
Okay.
If I had the authority, I potentially would, but because I don't, I did not.
I see. Thank you.
On that same issue, I certainly hope we give that a lot of consideration on how to handle that. This is unacceptable.
Right, and remember that this was drafted prior to, I believe, prior to them retaining the attorney. So even their attorney, I don't think, has had any input on the terms. It's possible that they're going to come in with maybe even additional or more specific terms that they want to the meeting. That is possible. He hasn't proposed those to me, but yeah, something that is a possibility because he was not part of the drafting of this document.
Statutes have some pretty fair ways to remedy, problems like this where totally
Sure.
disagree. I mean, other than circuit court.
So they don't have to, they don't have to delineate what remedies are for breach. There's going to be normal legal repercussions to breaching a contract. You can specify liquidated damages in a contract to say, if you breach, this is how much money you're going to have to give us, stuff like that. That way you avoid litigation. It pretty clearly sets out what the repercussions are to violating the agreement. We either can get into those types of specifics or leave it to, well, if you breach, we're going to have to go and litigate the matter. It comes down to what you as the committee prefer. Again, even having the liquidated damages in the contract gives kind of a framework of what is supposed to happen. But again, if they say, no, we're not going to give you that money, then you still have to go and litigate. It just gives a more specific amount to what the outcome is going to be. Okay. Most of what they have in here is really pretty general. Again, if they don't get into specifics, they don't get into how, for example, the grandstand issue is going to be remedied. They don't get into who technically owns the property. They don't mention it here. Obviously, we do, but in the other MOU, that's pretty clearly delineated. So a lot of this is pretty general. They do seem to indicate in this proposed MOU that they intend to take on a little bit more of the financial burden. They talk about them being
the utility 19.
Yep, 17, 18, 19, 21, and 22. They have to seek all aid. They have to use reasonable business practices in operating and maximizing the independence of the fair. They are responsible for cost of utilities except for water and sewer.
Is that currently what our agreement is?
They're responsible, say here, they shall absorb any financial losses resulting from the operation of the fair and be entitled to any profits resulting from the same. The problem is that this does not, their proposed MOU does not address what basically got us in this situation in the first place, which is, okay, well, everything has to be done by mutual agreement. So they say, hey, we want to do this, and we say no. Okay, nothing happens. And now again, we're at a jam where nothing's happening. Or we say, hey, this needs to happen, and they say no. Again, we're at a jam where nothing happens. They say, hey, we want money. We spent all our money. We need money for this. We say no. Again, we're at a jam of how does that then get funded? Does a project happen? It's all the same problems that our current MOU has. There needs to be a more specific mechanism that isn't in theirs. And I believe we tried to remedy a lot of those issues in our proposed MOU, which I'll send out.
Right, and I think at least with the first go around, when Chad Roberts and I and Mo sat down with the folks from the Fair Society, there was, how are you going to show that you're using best business practices and contribute some payback for this huge investment in the grandstand? Is it going to be $1 a head of people walking in? Is it going to be a part of the rents for storage in the winter? What mechanism? And it was a hard stop as far as agreeing, not being willing to engage in any conversation about any financial contribution from the fair to pay back the grandstand expenditure. So
they do under miscellaneous number 4 and
Well, they have on 21, a user fee without an amount for the grandstand.
yes, thank you. So they talk about the
User fee there.
user fee, but they don't establish one. And then they talk about that fee then would be given to us. So that would be basically our income with the usage of the grandstand. Additionally, under number 4, they talk about the fact that no previous promises will be affected by this agreement. I have a problem potentially conveying what the board did back in 2018 as any kind of promise. And I would not advise including that type of language in a contract. I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, they're gonna have to clean up 14 and 15, because the county and the fair responsible for permits, and then it's just the Fair Society is responsible for the permit. So those two are kind of contradictory too. I mean, they mix those two kind of where they share in the responsibility for repairs, and then unless the county agrees to share. in some things. I mean, that, the wording there isn't very good in those two, I don't think.
Right. Try to get a handle on the repairs as far as, complaints about the bathroom sweating during the fair.
Yeah.
Subsequently find out that the roof was replaced 3 years ago or so. They covered the roof vents up. So now they have wet floor signs in there and went and bought 2 fans hanging from a joist that they wired in to blow air down. To try to alleviate that kind of thing. And also for the additional funding, to be transparent, if they get a grant, what are they going to use that grant for? Is it for maintenance of the buildings? Is it for,
A new building or anything, yeah.
and
The sweating of the floors is kind of a common theme here. It's not that, that happens, right? But who's liable if somebody gets hurt? It's gonna be us. And that's why,
Yeah.
as a county, we want to make sure there's some clarity on who's expected to do what and by what standard. And the same might go for an emergency situation. And I don't know, and I can only report what I've been told, but if a tornado is coming toward an event at the fair and the sheriff's office says evacuate, is that the answer? Or does someone at the fair board have the right to say, no, let's finish this? Which is what happened.
They do include a provision in this document that says the sheriff's department will be the final authority on that type of situation. So what I would advise is that each of you take a close look at that document. Again, I will email you our proposed MOU as well. Take notes before our meeting on different things that you would potentially want to see that you don't think are necessary, et cetera, in those documents. If any of you have any questions or want to go over anything in there, feel free to reach out and set up a time to meet with me specifically in person. And we can invite Mo as well. And we can sit down and talk about any particular provisions you would want to see added, taken out, et cetera. And then we can just make sure that each of you is prepared to go in and talk about what you want to see in terms of the big picture items of the MOU. And then hopefully, again, my idea of what would potentially happen coming out of that meeting is that all of those big picture items would be knocked out and agreed to between the two parties, and then have the two parties say, okay, attorneys, you go and solidify the language to make what we talked about happen. But that will be a decision for that. All right. Any questions? Great. Again, if you want a paper copy, Jay,
Yeah.
you can stop by our office and.
I just do 2 by the time we leave today. I take one with. So I can. This way it's reference form, see?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Where did that one?
That's his name.
That's what they gave us.
I'll
but-
message my office. You're gonna scare 'em?
That's their party.
All right, we're gonna go into a closed session. The county administrator contract negotiations and performance review.
Is Amy the only one online, Claire?
There's a couple other people in the attendees.
Can we make sure Amy is a, what do we call it, panelist?
Yep, she's a panel.
And so then when we go into, okay, great.
Do-
Do we want to, before we go into closed session, just address the other topics that are on the agenda, so we don't have to worry about getting those other folks back on? Like the work plan and the upcoming meeting topics. Obviously, we have the ethics, which is going to continue on to the next meeting.
Right.
I don't think there's any updates to your work plan. But that way, once we are done with closed session, we can just
Yeah.
rejoin and adjourn.
That's the only thing that'll be added or put on.
That's the only topic I have. There might be something on your work plan for next month. Obviously, your next meeting is actually the meeting with the Fair Society, not
So it's
next
only
week,
a
but the
special
following
meeting.
week, and it's a special meeting, right?
That's all by itself, so that's. And we just discussed that.
That's the next meeting next.
Special meeting is August
Right,
twenty-sixth.
so
That's
this-
this month.
Right.
So the September meeting would have the ethics code and maybe an ordinance draft on there. I don't know any other topics that anybody has for that meeting.
Might put the ethics code on October, November.
In perpetuity.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, Malia, our next fair meeting is August 22nd, correct? And I have 7 AM. What time did we set that at? Is that correct?
No.
10.
10 a.m. Yep.
Okay, thank
They'll
you.
be there if it's
Yeah,
7
well, I
a.m.
would not be there.
Just wait.
9 o'clock.
Oh.
Hold on, let me.
Just
I think we did 9 o'clock for the first meeting.
Oh, that's right, because we had a
10 o'clock
pre-meeting
for the
10
second.
10 o'clock.
9 o'clock is when you all need to be here.
No, I don't think we need a pre-meeting because this was sort of that.
And if anyone wants to have a conversation before the meeting, again, reach out to me and we can meet one-on-one before.
Hate to meet one-on-one with an attorney. Never win.
Bad attitude. Have a better attitude.
All right, then let's get in a closed session.
Yes.
Right, I make a motion.
Open. We're back in open session. We were in our closed session with a motion from Jay under statute 19.36 and D, 19.851 C and E. Seconded by Kim, and it was unanimous to go in. And the only item we have left on our agenda is to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Stand adjourned at 10:20.
10:23.